Good morning, welcome to Breakfast with Louise Minchin and Charlie State.
Our headlines for you today. New coronavirus restrictions are set to be unveiled for the worst hit parts of England next week. The north is expected to face the toughest measures.
It follows new rules announced by the Scottish Government affecting pubs and restaurants, which come into force tomorrow.
Clashes over the COVID crisis. Mike Pence and Kamala Harris trade blows over the handling of the pandemic in the US vice presidential debate.
The American people have witnessed what is the greatest failure of any presidential administration in the history of our country.
Senator, I just ask you, stop playing politics with people's lives.
Conned out of £63,000. One woman's story about being a victim of romance fraud.
They know how to pull every single string, how to emotionally blackmail you, because that was what was happening the whole way through.
Good morning. A plan for travel testing could be weeks away, but is it too little, too late? The government will try and cut time spent in quarantine. The travel industry says that's too late for thousands of jobs.
Good morning. A blow for Scotland ahead of their Euro 2020 playoff, as they'll be missing three of the most important players for tonight's game against Israel after one of them tests positive for coronavirus.
Good morning. We've had some heavy rain and gusty winds overnight. That rain will quickly clear to the east but slowly clear away from the south, leaving behind it bright spells, sunshine and some showers. But I'll have all the details in about 10 minutes.
Morning to you. It's Thursday, the 8th of October. Our top story, pubs and restaurants could be closed again in parts of England with the highest rates of infection.
The measures, which could form part of a new three-tier system for local lockdowns, are expected to be announced early next week. Comes after stricter rules were issued in Scotland yesterday. Andy Moore has the story.
It now looks almost certain there will be new restrictions in the north of England. Manchester will very likely be affected. What hasn't been resolved is what form they will take and where they will be imposed. Options include the closure of pubs and restaurants and possibly a ban on overnight stays away from home. There's also likely to be a simpler, more easily understood system of restrictions where areas are put into a certain tier according to the level of infection. Cities in the north and the Midlands have some of the highest coronavirus rates in the whole of the country. Liverpool has 552 cases per 100,000 people. Manchester has 542 cases per 100,000 and Nottingham 497. In many of these places, local restrictions are already in force.
These local restrictions that have been put in place in much of the north of England really haven't been very effective. You can see rates still going up. Very rapidly. And so we need to take much more stringent measures, not just in the north of England, actually. I think we need to do it countrywide and bring the epidemic back under control.
Across the country, the number of COVID deaths is rising. So too are the figures for admissions to hospitals.
There's a serious risk that the NHS will become overwhelmed in very short order. The increase in numbers of coronavirus cases is hard to compare from earlier this year because, of course, we're testing far more. But the number of people being admitted to hospital is directly comparable from earlier this year. And it's on a very serious trajectory upwards.
In Scotland, new restrictions will come into force tomorrow evening. There will be no drinking inside bars and restaurants for over a fortnight. In the central belt, including Glasgow and Edinburgh, licensed premises will have to shut to all but takeaway services. There will be financial support for the hospitality industry in Scotland, but the details are unclear. In England too, the Treasury is looking at how to offer help to pubs and restaurants if tighter restrictions are imposed. Andy Moore, BBC News.
Let's get the latest now from our political correspondent, Chris Mason. Very good morning to you, Chris. So help us with this one. We've seen what's happened in Scotland. The talk, and it's more than that now, of course, is that something will be changing in England next week.
Yeah, morning to you, Charlie. That's right. There are going to be changes coming to pockets of the north of England. The precise details, if we're honest, at this stage, we don't know because they are not yet signed off. Speaking to people in government, there are big decisions to take. They are acutely aware that it's a kind of lose-lose situation for them. They're hearing, as we heard there in Andy's report, from the medics who say the situation as far as the virus is concerned is increasingly bleak, and yet at the same time they know that the buttons that they might have to press to try and suppress it will have really harsh economic consequences, but also consequences for all of our liberties and our freedoms. So yeah, some of the ideas on the table include pubs and restaurants in the north of England having far tighter restrictions imposed upon them, perhaps something similar to what we've seen in Scotland. We're already seeing some local leaders act themselves before there's action from the government here at Westminster. So local leaders in Nottinghamshire, for instance, advising people there not to go into each other's houses. So a real awareness, as we're well into autumn now, that restrictions are tightening, and the government trying to get that balance right between keeping the economy and our lives going and suppressing the virus and stopping short of another full lockdown. The real desire is to keep businesses where possible and schools for certain open.
Chris, for the moment, thank you very much.
The US Vice President Mike Pence and his Democratic challenger Kamala Harris took part in their only debate ahead of the next month's election.
The candidates clashed over the economy, foreign policy, healthcare and racial justice. Ms. Harris criticised the Trump administration's coronavirus response as the greatest failure in presidential history, while Mr. Pence accused her of undermining confidence in an eventual vaccine.
This administration stood on information that if you had as a parent, if you had as a worker, knowing you didn't have enough money saved up, and now you're standing in a food line because of the ineptitude of an administration that was unwilling to speak the truth to the American people.
The fact that you continue to undermine public confidence in a vaccine, if the vaccine emerges during the Trump administration, I think is unconscionable. And Senator, I just ask you, stop playing politics with people's lives.
Well, that's a little taster for you of the discussions. Let's speak now to our North America correspondent, Peter Bowes. And just, Peter, how significant was that debate?
Well, traditionally, the vice presidential debate tends not to be that significant. People tend not to make up their minds depending on who is the vice presidential candidate. But of course, it's different this year with two presidential candidates, both men in their 70s. President Trump has coronavirus, and it was significant that one of the questions, which actually both of the candidates dodged, was whether they'd had a discussion with their presidential running mate about what happens in a situation where the president perhaps falls ill or is disabled in some way and is unable to carry out their duties. Aside from that, they did cover all of the key issues. It was a much more gentle debate. There were quite a few interruptions, but nothing like the row that we saw last week between the two presidential candidates. There is one moment that seems to be getting a lot of attention in social media, and that's when a fly landed on the head of Mike Pence and stayed there for 2 minutes.
I mean, you know, he was. Did he not realise?
We don't think he did realise. In fact, even a lot of people watching initially didn't notice it. And then, of course, it becomes very apparent that there's this fly sitting on his head. It didn't seem to bother him. But of course, it has, well, just about gone viral. And it is now the subject of a lot of jokes at Mike Pence's expense.
Yeah. Oh, well, listen, thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Well, Donald Trump has described being infected with COVID-19 as a blessing from God. The president's doctors say he's displayed no coronavirus symptoms for the past 24 hours. And in a video message, Mr. Trump said he wanted all Americans to have access to the treatments he was given free of charge.
I want everybody to be given the same treatment as your president, because I feel great. I feel like perfect. So I think this was a blessing from God that I caught it. This was a blessing in disguise. I caught it. I heard about this drug. I said, let me take it. It was my suggestion. I said, let me take it. And it was incredible the way it worked. Incredible.
Two British members of the Islamic State group have appeared in a US federal court to face charges related to the killing of Western hostages in Syria. Alexander Coty and El Shafi El Sheikh appeared by video link in a Virginia courtroom because of coronavirus restrictions. They've previously admitted having contact with the hostages, but claimed their main role was helping ransom negotiations. They said they had nothing to do with the killings, which were recorded on video. Both men face life in prison if convicted.
Homeless charities are calling on the Prime Minister not to allow night shelters to be opened in England this winter. They claim the shelters can't be operated in a COVID-secure way. They want to see funding similar to that which housed many homeless people in hotels back in March.
You might have seen Harry Billinge on Breakfast yesterday as he went to see a train named in his honour for the first time.
The 95-year-old D-Day veteran had a bit of a wait on the platform as the train taking him to the ceremony in Penzance yesterday morning was an hour late. Harry raised more than £25,000 to build a national memorial for fallen comrades, said it was overwhelming to be honoured in this way.
I was watching him yesterday. He was describing it, as he always does pretty much, as marvellous.
Yes.
It's just lovely.
Good phrase.
Isn't it?
I've always been fascinated by family history because we haven't necessarily always had the people that you could ask.
Oh my gosh, he was a grave digger. Brutal.
We lost the showman tradition in our family.
You're back in it.
Very kind of you to call me a showman.
I'm quite rarely speechless, but I'm almost speechless.
Also, I think he's a very handsome chap, and obviously the genes run in the family.
BAFTA award-winning Who Do You Think You Are starts Monday at 9 on BBC One and iPlayer.
We're going to have a quick look at the papers for you this morning. And the possible closure of pubs and restaurants in parts of England leads many of the papers. The Times says the decision has already been made by the Prime Minister and will be introduced on Monday. Mr Johnson is also said to have approved financial support for those affected areas.
Let's have a look at the Scottish Daily Mail. The news comes after similar restrictions announced, of course, across the Central Belt in Scotland. A raft of new rules to try and limit the spread of the virus. The paper describing it as Sturgeon's last orders.
The Mirror leads on a warning from the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, that local lockdowns are not working. It says infection rates are soaring in 19 out of 20 areas where extra restrictions were imposed.
And online, the Huffington Post top story is a video message from President Donald Trump where he describes getting coronavirus as a blessing from God.
I'm sure have a quick look at the inside papers. Have you got, I can't remember, have you got a cat? I think you...
I have, yes.
Yes?
Not
okay.
with me, but yes.
Well, not today
home,
in the
yes.
studio, good. So this is, I love a little bit of cat news. They're meant to be sort of fickle and wary of strangers, but now research suggests they can be won over, Charlie, I don't know if you know this from your cat, by narrowing your eyes and slow blinking at them. Apparently, when you bring your eyelids slowly together for a couple of seconds while looking at cats, they're more likely to respond because cats are thought to blink slowly and then fully close their eyes when they're happy, and they appear to appreciate the same facial expressions in humans.
Yeah, so
slow blink. I don't know why I'm talking slowly. Slow blinking is the way
So
forward
what we
with your
need
cat.
to do now is, Lou, have a demonstration of it. So imagine I am the cat.
No, I'm not.
And let's
I'm
get, which is
genuinely
at
not
camera
playing this
5,
game.
is
It's
Lou's
too
single.
early.
And then we go for, so what we're needing, Lou, is a slow... No, go with this, because it's going to work. I'm sure it's going to work. The cat is here.
I'm not ready for role play this time in the morning.
The cat is here, just next to you on the sofa, and you're going to give it the warm, slow blink.
Ready? Oh, well, I've got to look
No,
at
do it,
the-
yeah, do it
ready.
that angle
Ready.
towards 5.
Gosh, I nearly fell asleep.
Did that work? I don't know. Did it work? I'm not sure the verdict on that one. I'm not sure. 6:15. Cats everywhere have been running from the TV screens.
See the headlines as they happen and watch BBC News live in the app and get the full story with bbc.co.uk/news. Follow the story for all the latest with BBC News.